January 8th, 1989. A brand new Boeing 737 is on fire. One engine has failed. The pilots know it. They shut it down. The fire stops, the vibration disappears. The aircraft steadies. They got it. Except they didn't. They had just shut down the wrong engine, and the one keeping them in the air, the damaged one, was quietly dying. 47 people would not survive the next 4 minutes.
On the evening of January 8th, 1989, British Midland Flight 092 departed London Heathrow Airport, bound for Belfast International. On board, 118 passengers and 8 crew members, 126 people in total. The aircraft was a Boeing 737-400, almost factory new. Tail number G-OBME had been delivered to British Midland just 3 months earlier, in October 1988. It had logged only 521 hours of flying time. The engines had never been serviced. The timing was significant for another reason. Just 3 weeks earlier, Pan Am Flight 103 had been destroyed over Lockerbie, Scotland, killing 270 people. The United Kingdom was still in shock. No one expected to see another fatal aviation accident this quickly. Flight 092 departed at 1952 GMT. 13 minutes later, climbing through 28,300 feet, everything changed.
At 20:05 GMT, a fan blade in the number 1 engine, the left engine, fractured. The blade had developed a fatigue crack that had gone undetected during manufacturing. Under the stress of flight, it broke. The effect in the cockpit was immediate and overwhelming. Severe vibration shook the entire airframe. A sharp smell of fire entered the flight deck through the air conditioning vents. Multiple warning lights activated simultaneously. In the cabin, passengers could see sparks and flames clearly visible from the left engine. 3 members of the cabin crew also witnessed this. None of them informed the cockpit. Captain Kevin Hunt and First Officer David McClelland were facing a crisis that was, in the words of the AAIB report, outside their training and experience. The combination of noise, vibration, and smell of smoke hit them simultaneously, with no time to methodically work through the checklist. Captain Hunt asked his first officer which engine was causing the trouble. The first officer began to say,
It's the right one.
The captain responded immediately.
Okay, throttle it back.
That single exchange, 4 seconds of cockpit communication, set everything that followed in motion. To understand why 2 experienced pilots made this mistake, you have to understand something about the aircraft they were flying. Both Captain Hunt and First Officer McClelland had extensive experience flying earlier Boeing 737 models, the 737-200 and 737-300. On those aircraft, the right-hand engine supplied the air used for the cabin's air conditioning system. The 737-400 was different. Boeing had redesigned the air conditioning system. On this newer variant, bleed air from both engines fed the cabin ventilation. Neither pilot had been specifically briefed on this change during their transition training to the 737-400. So when smoke and the smell of fire entered the cabin through the air conditioning vents, and cabin crew reported this to the cockpit, the pilot's mental model told them one thing: the smoke was coming from the right engine. It was the right engine that connected to those vents. It was the right engine that must be on fire. It wasn't. Captain Hunt throttled back the right engine. The vibration, which was coming from the left engine, reduced noticeably. Not because they had addressed the problem, but because reducing thrust on any engine during a fan blade failure reduces the stress on the damaged one. The left engine was shaking less. To the pilots, this confirmed everything. The right engine was the problem. Throttling it back had worked. They shut it down completely. The aircraft now had one engine. The aircraft now had one engine. The damaged left engine, the one with the fractured fan blade, was the only thing keeping 126 people in the air. For the next several minutes, it held. The aircraft began its descent toward East Midlands Airport, less than 8 miles away. The pilots made a PA announcement to the passengers, explaining that they had experienced a problem with the right engine and were diverting for a precautionary landing. The passengers, many of whom had seen flames from the left engine with their own eyes, assumed the crew knew something they didn't. Nobody said anything.
At around 2020 GMT, with the aircraft approximately 3 miles from the runway, the crew increased power on the left engine for the final approach. The damaged fan blade, which had been barely holding together under reduced thrust, could not take it. The left engine suffered a catastrophic secondary failure. Thrust dropped almost to zero. The aircraft, at low altitude, fully configured for landing, with one engine already shut down and the other now failing, had almost no options left. The crew declared a mayday. Flight 092 struck the embankment of the M1 motorway at 2024 GMT, less than half a mile short of the runway threshold. The aircraft broke apart on impact. The fuselage came to rest on the far embankment of the motorway. Of the 126 people on board, 47 were killed. 74 survived but sustained serious injuries. Only 5 passengers escaped without significant injury. The rescue operation that followed was extraordinary. 17 fire engines, 50 ambulances, and more than 200 emergency personnel converged on the crash site within minutes. The M1 motorway was closed in both directions. The most critically injured were airlifted by helicopter to nearby hospitals.
The Air Accidents Investigation Branch published its final report in August 1990. It made 51 findings and 31 safety recommendations, one of the most comprehensive accident reports in British aviation history. The AAIB's conclusion was precise. The cause of the accident was that the crew shut down engine number 2, the right, healthy engine, after a fan blade had fractured on engine number 1. The damaged left engine subsequently suffered a major thrust loss when power was increased on final approach. But the report was careful to go further than simply blaming the pilots. It identified 4 interconnected failures that together produced the outcome. First, the transition training for the 737-400 did not adequately brief pilots on the redesigned air conditioning system. The change from single to dual-engine bleed air was a critical difference from earlier 737 models, and it was not emphasized. Second, the new digital vertical ribbon engine instrument displays on the 737-400 were significantly harder to read at a glance than the traditional circular dials on earlier models. Under stress, the pilots failed to correctly read the vibration indicators, which were clearly showing the left engine as the problem. Third, the cabin crew and passengers who had directly observed flames from the left engine did not report this to the cockpit. The captain's PA announcement, incorrectly identifying the right engine as the problem, led everyone to assume the crew already knew which engine had failed. Fourth, crew resource management training at the time did not adequately prepare crews to challenge a captain's stated diagnosis or to actively solicit information from cabin crew during an in-flight emergency.
The Kegworth disaster reshaped aviation safety in ways that touch every flight today. Transition training for new aircraft variants was fundamentally reformed. Airlines and manufacturers were required to specifically brief pilots on every system that differed from earlier variants, not just the major differences, but the ones that seemed minor. The 737-400's air conditioning redesign would never again be a footnote. Engine instrument displays were redesigned across the industry to make critical data, particularly vibration levels, unambiguous and immediately readable under stress. The AAIB's finding that the vertical ribbon displays were difficult to read under pressure drove a generation of improvements in cockpit instrumentation design. Crew resource management training was expanded to include cabin crew. Flight attendants are now specifically trained to report observations, smoke, flames, unusual sounds from specific engines, to the cockpit immediately, even if they believe the pilots already know. The assumption that the pilots must know was identified at Kegworth as potentially fatal, and it is now specifically addressed in training worldwide. The brace position used globally today, head down, hands protecting the neck, was standardized directly following the Kegworth investigation.
The injury analysis from Flight 092 showed that the previous brace position left passengers unnecessarily exposed. The revised position, now known informally as the Kegworth variant, has since saved lives in multiple accidents. Fan blade inspection requirements were significantly tightened. The CFM56 engine family, involved in the Kegworth failure, underwent mandatory inspection schedules that continue today.
Captain Hunt, speaking in a BBC documentary 2 years after the crash, said something that has stayed with aviation safety researchers ever since. He said, "We made a mistake. We both made mistakes. But the question we would like answered is why we made those mistakes." That question is at the heart of every investigation in this series. Not just what went wrong, but why. Why did trained, experienced professionals make decisions that, in hindsight, seem impossible to understand? At Kegworth, the answer was that the system around those pilots, the training, the instruments, the communication protocols, the aircraft documentation, had not given them what they needed to make the right decision in the time they had. The 47 people who died on the M1 embankment that night are the reason every cabin crew member in the world is now trained to pick up the interphone and tell the cockpit exactly what they see. That conversation between the back of the plane and the front is one of the things keeping you safe every time you fly. If you want to understand how aviation built that safety net, one disaster at a time, subscribe. We'll be back next week with another investigation.